What makes a teacher unforgettable? Is it the flashy technology they use in the classroom, or the number of students who get a perfect score on a test? We live in a world obsessed with progress, often forgetting that the most powerful lessons aren't downloaded from an app. They're sparked in the human heart. Today, you'll discover the story of a teacher who was dismissed as a relic of the past, humiliated in front of her peers. But when everyone thought her career was over, she ignited a quiet revolution with a single lesson, proving that true inspiration is timeless. Get ready, because this story will remind you of the one teacher you will never forget. The first bell of the morning at Northwood High screamed through the hallways, a sound that signaled both a beginning and an end. For most students, it was the start of another day of navigating social hierarchies and academic pressures. For Eleanor Vance, it was another day of feeling like a ghost in the machine. As she walked through the crowded corridors, a stack of worn-out copies of To Kill a Mockingbird held tightly to her chest. She was a living anachronism. Her tweed blazer and sensible shoes stood in stark contrast to the sea of hoodies, ripped jeans, and glowing smartphone screens that surrounded her. She offered warm smiles to the students rushing past. Some nodded politely, a conditioned reflex, but others openly snickered. "Look, it's Professor Dinosaur," a popular senior named Liam whispered to his friends, just loud enough for her to hear. The group erupted in quiet laughter. Eleanor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she kept walking, her posture erect. The sting of their words was familiar, a dull ache she had learned to carry with a quiet grace. The teacher's lounge offered little refuge. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the buzz of conversation centered on the latest educational apps and digital platforms. "I just integrated a new AI grading system. It's a game changer," one young teacher announced proudly. "My students are creating TikToks to summarize Shakespeare. Their engagement is through the roof," another added. Eleanor sat in her usual corner, sipping her tea, feeling like a tourist in a foreign land. She didn't resent their enthusiasm. She understood the world was changing. But her philosophy was rooted in something deeper, something she felt was being lost in the rush for innovation. She believed in the power of a shared story, in the quiet magic of a classroom discussion where students discovered empathy for characters created a century ago. She believed that the goal of education wasn't just to prepare for a job, but to build a soul. But in the metrics-driven world of Northwood High, her ideas were increasingly seen as quaint and inefficient. Today, however, the usual tension was amplified. A mandatory all-staff assembly had been called, and the whispers suggested that the school's ambitious principal, Ms. Miller, had a major announcement. Eleanor felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She had a feeling this meeting would be about more than just school policy. The auditorium was filled with the low murmur of anxious chatter. Eleanor found a seat in the front row, a habit from her early teaching days when she believed sitting close showed eagerness. Now, it just made her feel more exposed. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as Principal Miller strode onto the stage. She was a formidable presence, dressed in a sharp, modern pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She radiated an aura of corporate efficiency, viewing the school not as a community of learners, but as a business whose product was high test scores and a pristine public image. She tapped the microphone, and her voice, crisp and devoid of warmth, echoed through the hall. "Good morning, Northwood High," she began. "As you know, we are living in a rapidly evolving world. Our mission is not just to educate, but to innovate. Our students must be prepared to compete on a global scale." Her speech was a whirlwind of buzzwords: synergy, digital integration, 21st century skills, data-driven instruction. She praised the teachers who had embraced new technologies, projecting their names onto a large screen behind her. Then, her tone shifted. "However," she said, her voice hardening slightly, "to move forward, we cannot be held back by the past. We must be willing to shed outdated methods that no longer serve our students. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the front row and locked onto Eleanor. The eye contact was brief, but it was sharp, deliberate, and deeply chilling. We cannot afford to have educators who are stuck in the 20th century. Our students deserve better. A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over the auditorium. No name was mentioned, but the target was clear to everyone. It was a public execution carried out with surgical precision. Eleanor felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. She could feel the pity from some, the smug agreement from others. Her colleagues, even those she considered friends, suddenly found the ceiling tiles or their own shoes intensely fascinating. They wouldn't meet her gaze. Through a small crack in the auditorium door, she could see a few students peering in, including Liam. She saw him whisper something to his friends, followed by a cruel, triumphant smirk. The humiliation was absolute, not because of a loud accusation, but because of the deafening silence that followed. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her back straight. She felt like a statue in a museum, a relic on display for everyone to judge. The assembly wasn't about modernization. It was a declaration of war on her entire life's work. The aftermath of the assembly was a slow, creeping poison. Principal Miller's words had given a license to the casual cruelty that had once been confined to whispers. Now, it was spoken aloud. As Eleanor walked back to her classroom, the hallways felt like a gauntlet. Students who had once ignored her now openly pointed and laughed. The nickname Liam had coined, Professor Dinosaur, became common parlance, a casual joke tossed around with careless abandon. The disrespect was no longer just a symptom of teenage apathy. It was a school-sanctioned sport. The weight of their collective scorn was a physical presence, pressing down on her shoulders, making each step feel heavier than the last. She found a caricature of herself drawn on her classroom whiteboard, a stooped figure with a T-Rex head holding a dusty book. Below it the words "Extinction is coming" were scrawled in large letters. She erased it quickly before any students could see her reaction, but the image was seared into her mind. Her classroom, once her sanctuary, now felt like a hostile territory. During her lessons, students would scroll through their phones with blatant disregard, their faces illuminated by the blue light of indifference. When she asked a question about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, Liam responded loudly, "I don't know. Why don't you ask Siri?" The ensuing laughter was sharp and brutal. Each day became a battle for a sliver of respect she knew she wouldn't win. The isolation was the worst part. In the teacher's lounge, conversations would halt when she entered. Colleagues who had once shared stories and sought her advice now offered only tight, fleeting smiles before turning back to their own circles. They were not unkind, but they were afraid. To associate with Eleanor was to risk being seen as resistant to Principal Miller's agenda, to be marked as another piece of deadwood waiting to be cleared away. So she began to eat her lunch alone in her classroom, the silence of the empty room a welcome respite from the charged silence of the lounge. In those quiet moments, the doubt she had been fighting for years began to win. Was she truly obsolete? Had her passion for literature, her belief in the power of stories, become irrelevant in this new, fast-paced world? She looked at her hands, the skin thin and papery, the knuckles swollen slightly with age. They were the hands that had guided generations of students through complex prose, that had written countless words of encouragement on essays. Now, they just felt old and tired. One particularly grueling Tuesday evening, Eleanor returned home feeling utterly defeated. The house was quiet, a silence that had once been peaceful, but now felt cavernous and empty. She sank into her favorite armchair, the weight of the day pressing down on her. For the first time in her 40-year career, she seriously considered retiring. The thought of quitting, of surrendering, filled her with a profound sense of failure. It felt like letting down not just herself, but every author she had ever taught, every character whose struggles and triumphs she had shared. Seeking some form of solace, she went up to the attic, a dusty repository of her life's memories. In a corner, under a white sheet, was an old wooden chest. She lifted the heavy lid, releasing the faint, sweet scent of aging paper and cedar. Inside were her most treasured possessions, not awards or plaques, but thick bundles of letters tied together with faded ribbons. They were letters from former students, sent from college dorms, from first jobs, from halfway around the world. She untied one bundle and began to read. A letter from a young woman who had become a lawyer. "Dear Mrs. Vance, I was in your class in '98. I just finished my first big case, defending a man who everyone thought was guilty. I thought of you and Atticus Finch the entire time. Thank you for teaching me what true courage is." Another from a soldier stationed overseas. "I keep my copy of the Odyssey you gave me in my pack. Reading it reminds me that no matter how far I wander, the journey home is what matters. Thank you for giving me that." A third, written on a crumpled napkin from a young man who had almost dropped out. "You were the only one who didn't give up on me. You told me my story was worth telling. Well, I'm a journalist now, and I owe it all to you." She spent hours reading, the tears streaming down her face, washing away the grime of the day's humiliation. These letters were not about test scores or digital skills. They were about life, about character, about the enduring impact of a single person who chose to see the potential in a young soul. They were tangible proof that her work mattered, that it had rippled out into the world in ways she could never have imagined. The doubt that had clouded her heart began to recede, replaced by a familiar, fiery spark. Her passion wasn't obsolete. The world hadn't changed that much. The human heart still yearned for connection, for meaning, for a story that made sense of its own struggles. A new resolve hardened within her. She would not surrender. She would not fade away into bitter retirement. She would fight, not with anger, but with the very tools she had always used. A story, a lesson, a final powerful project to prove to her students and to herself that her purpose was far from over. The next morning, Eleanor Vance walked into her classroom with a renewed sense of purpose. There was a different light in her eyes, a quiet determination that even the most disruptive students noticed. The usual air of weary resignation was gone, replaced by a calm, focused energy. She set her books on her desk and turned to face the class, a faint, enigmatic smile on her lips. The students exchanged confused glances. Liam, slouched in the back row, prepared a sarcastic comment, but something in her demeanor made him pause. She wasn't starting with a lecture or a reading assignment. Instead, she began with a simple question. "What is a legacy?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. A few students shrugged. One offered, "Money your parents leave you?" Eleanor nodded. "That's one kind," she said, "but a legacy is also a story. It's what we leave behind in the hearts and minds of others. It's the part of us that endures." She then unveiled her plan. "For our final project this semester," she announced, "we are going to create something I call the Legacy Project. I want each of you to find an object from your life. It doesn't have to be valuable. It just has to be important to you. It has to tell a piece of your story." The announcement was met with a wave of groans and cynical laughter. "Seriously? A show and tell?" Liam scoffed from the back, and several others joined in his ridicule. "What are we, in kindergarten?" another student chimed in. The resistance was exactly what she had expected. They saw it as another old-fashioned assignment, disconnected from their fast-paced digital lives. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She held their gaze, her expression patient and unwavering. "This isn't about the object itself," she explained calmly. "It's about the story it holds. It's about understanding that literature isn't just something you read in a book. It's something you live. Your own lives are the most important texts you will ever encounter." Her sincerity was disarming. The laughter died down, replaced by a grudging curiosity. She gave them a week to find their objects, encouraging them to talk to their families, to look through old boxes, to think deeply about what had shaped them. As the bell rang, most students rushed out, already complaining about the weird assignment. But a few lingered, a thoughtful expression on their faces. A quiet girl who rarely spoke approached her desk. "Mrs. Vance," she asked hesitantly, "does it have to be a happy story?" Eleanor looked at her with deep compassion. "Of course not," she replied softly. "The most powerful stories are often born from pain. And it's in moments like this, when a teacher creates a safe space for a student to be vulnerable, that real education happens. It reminds us that a teacher's value isn't measured by their age, but by the impact they have. If you agree that every educator who inspires deserves our respect, take a second to hit that like button. It helps spread this message to more people. The day the Legacy Project presentations were due, the atmosphere in the classroom was thick with a mixture of teenage awkwardness and nervous anticipation. Eleanor began the class not as a teacher, but as a storyteller, sharing her own object first, a small tarnished silver locket. She spoke of her mother, a woman she had lost when she was young, and how the locket was her only remaining connection to her. Her story was simple, honest and deeply human, and it set a tone of vulnerability that silenced the room. One by one, students began to share. A shy girl presented a worn-out cookbook, its pages stained with grease and love, and spoke of her grandmother who had taught her to cook before she passed away. A football player, known for his tough exterior, showed a tiny, faded photograph of his baby brother, speaking with a tenderness no one had ever seen from him. The classroom was transforming from a place of academic instruction into a sanctuary of shared humanity. Then it was Liam's turn. He sauntered to the front of the class with his usual swagger, a smirk on his face, as if to signal that he was above this sentimental exercise. "All right, let's get this over with," he said, trying to regain his status as the class cynic. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a vintage silver pocket watch, its glass face cracked and its hands frozen in time. "This was my grandfather's," he began, his tone still flippant. "He was a watchmaker. He could fix anything except apparently this." He expected a laugh, but the room remained quiet, waiting. Something about the silence seemed to unnerve him. His smirk faded. "He died before I was born," Liam continued, his voice suddenly softer, losing its performative edge. "My dad doesn't talk about him much. Says it's too painful. This watch is all I have of him." He stared at the broken object in his hand, and for the first time, the class saw not a popular, arrogant teenager, but a boy grappling with a history he couldn't touch. "I always wondered what he was like," Liam admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "My dad said he was a quiet man, that he believed time was the most precious gift we have. And I guess he ran out of it." He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, a raw vulnerability exposed for all to see. "I keep it with me, thinking that maybe one day I'll figure out how to fix it, or maybe just understand him." The mask was gone. In its place was a profound and aching longing for connection. The class was utterly still, bound by the power of his unexpected confession. In that moment, Eleanor Vance knew her project had worked. She hadn't just taught a lesson, she had unlocked a heart. The silence that followed Liam's confession was unlike any Eleanor had ever experienced in her classroom. It wasn't the bored, disengaged silence she was used to, nor was it the tense silence of a disciplined room. It was a profound, shared stillness, thick with empathy. The students looked at Liam, not with the admiration they usually gave their popular leader, but with a newfound, deeper respect. They saw him, truly saw him, for the first time. The emotional armor of an entire classroom had been pierced by the story of a broken watch. When the bell finally rang, no one rushed for the door. They moved slowly, quietly, as if leaving a sacred space. A few students gave Liam a supportive pat on the shoulder as they passed. He simply nodded, still processing the vulnerability he had just displayed. From that day on, the entire dynamic of the class shifted. The cynical eye rolls and whispered jokes vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of mutual respect and genuine curiosity. Students who had never spoken to each other before started conversations in the hallways. The tough football player asked the quiet girl about her grandmother's recipes. Liam, in a move that shocked everyone, sat with a nerdy, often bullied student at lunch and asked him about the video game he was designing. The change was not confined to Eleanor's classroom. It began to spill out into the rest of the school, like a slow, steady current. The story of the Legacy Project became a legend, whispered in the hallways. Students from other classes were intrigued. "Did you hear what happened in Mrs. Vance's class?" they'd ask. They said Liam actually cried. The project took on a mythical quality. It was no longer a weird assignment from an old-fashioned teacher. It was an experience. Eleanor's name, once a punchline, was now spoken with a tone of awe and admiration. Students she didn't even teach would greet her in the hall with a respectful, "Hello, Mrs. Vance." The ripple effect was undeniable. Other teachers began to notice the dramatic shift in their own students who were in Eleanor's class. They were more thoughtful in discussions, more compassionate with their peers. A history teacher, one who had previously dismissed Eleanor as past her prime, stopped her in the lounge. "Eleanor," he admitted, a look of genuine curiosity on his face, "I don't know what you're doing in there, but it's working. My students are more engaged than they've been all year." For the first time in a long time, Eleanor didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like a catalyst. She had ignited a spark, and now it was spreading, warming the cold, sterile halls of Northwood High with a much-needed dose of humanity. The growing buzz around Eleanor Vance and her legacy project did not go unnoticed by Principal Miller. She monitored the school's social dynamics with the precision of a hawk, and this new, positive narrative, centered on a teacher she had publicly marked for obsolescence, was an unwelcome development. In her mind, Eleanor's success was a direct challenge to her authority and her vision for a data-driven, technology-focused school. It was a sentimental distraction from the real work of raising test scores. Her annoyance festered, turning into a cold resolve. She decided she needed to put an end to this sentimental nonsense and reassert her control. She chose her moment carefully, waiting for a day when the project presentations were in full swing. She strode into Eleanor's classroom without knocking, her presence immediately sucking the warm, collaborative energy out of the room. A student was in the middle of sharing a story about his first pair of soccer cleats, but his voice faltered and died under Principal Miller's icy glare. "Mrs. Vance," the principal began, her voice sharp and condescending, "I think we've indulged this little therapeutic exercise for long enough." She gestured dismissively at the objects on the students' desks. "This is not education. This is a waste of valuable instruction time. We have standardized tests to prepare for, not a group therapy session to conduct." The students froze, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. They looked from the principal's rigid, disapproving face to Eleanor's calm, steady one. Eleanor was about to respond, to defend her students and her methods, but before she could utter a word, another voice cut through the tension. "You're wrong." All heads turned. It was Liam. He was standing, his chair pushed back, his posture defiant. He looked directly at Principal Miller, his voice ringing with a conviction no one had ever heard from him before. "This is the most important class I've ever taken," he declared. "For years, you've been telling us we need to be prepared for the real world. Well, what part of the real world is more important than understanding people, than learning how to listen, than realizing that everyone, even the people you think you know, has a story you know nothing about?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the class. Another student stood up. "She's the first teacher who ever made me feel like my voice mattered," she said, her voice trembling but strong. One by one, other students rose to their feet. A silent, powerful army standing in solidarity with their teacher. It was a quiet rebellion, a stunning act of collective courage. Principal Miller was left speechless, her authority crumbling before her eyes, utterly defeated not by a rival administrator, but by the unified hearts of a classroom she had failed to understand. The confrontation became the stuff of Northwood High legend almost instantly. The story of Liam and the other students standing up to Principal Miller spread like wildfire, recounted with breathless excitement in the cafeteria, in the gym, and on social media. Eleanor Vance was no longer just an inspiring teacher, she was the leader of a quiet revolution. The incident galvanized the student body. The Legacy Project became a symbol of a different kind of education, one they craved, an education of the heart. The support for Eleanor became a powerful, unifying force. Students who had never cared about school politics were suddenly engaged, passionately defending her methods. The movement was organic and unstoppable, inspired by the very lessons on narrative and voice they had learned in her class. Liam and a small group of his classmates decided they needed to do more than just defend her. They needed to celebrate her. Working in secret after school, they began to plan a surprise tribute. They used their newfound skills to craft a powerful presentation. They interviewed other students, collecting stories of how Eleanor had impacted them. They reached out to alumni through social media, and the response was overwhelming. Emails and video messages poured in from former students around the world. Doctors, artists, soldiers, and parents, all echoing the same sentiment. Mrs. Vance changed my life. The students compiled these testimonials into a moving video montage. They also created a legacy wall in the main hallway, a massive corkboard where students anonymously posted notes about their own stories and struggles inspired by the project. The wall became a living testament to her impact, a place of vulnerability and connection that transformed the school's sterile environment. Even some of the teachers, emboldened by the students' courage, began to offer their support, quietly helping with the logistics of the tribute. The school was buzzing with a secret, a positive conspiracy of gratitude, while Principal Miller fumed in her office, isolated by her own rigid authority. An army of voices was rising in Eleanor's name, proving that true influence isn't commanded, it's earned. On the Friday before the final week of school, the plan was put into motion. During the lunch break, Liam made a school-wide announcement over the intercom, a system usually reserved for administrative decrees. "Could all students and staff please gather in the main courtyard for a special presentation?" he said, his voice clear and confident. A confused murmur went through the school, but everyone, including Eleanor, began to file outside. When Eleanor stepped into the courtyard, she stopped in her tracks. The entire student body was there, standing in a silent, expectant crowd. In the center, a large screen had been set up. Liam met her at the edge of the crowd and gently led her to a single chair placed at the front. "This is for you, Mrs. Vance," he whispered. The video began to play. For 15 minutes, the courtyard was filled with the voices of the past and present. Students on screen spoke of her kindness, her patience, and the way she made them feel seen. Alumni from decades past shared how her lessons on literature had shaped their character and guided their lives. The final image was a simple message on a black screen. "A legacy is the story we leave behind. Thank you for helping us write ours." As the video ended, tears were streaming down Eleanor's face. The legacy wall was then unveiled, covered in hundreds of colorful notes of hope, pain, and gratitude. The sheer scale of her impact, visible for all to see, was overwhelming. Principal Miller stood on the steps of the school entrance, watching from a distance. Her face was an unreadable mask, but her posture screamed defeat. She was utterly alone, a powerless monarch watching her kingdom celebrate a leader they had chosen themselves. Liam took the microphone one last time. "Mrs. Vance taught us that every story matters," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Today, we wanted to make sure she knew how much her story matters to us. He turned to her and began to clap. The applause started with him, then spread to the front row, and then, like a tidal wave, it engulfed the entire courtyard. It was thunderous, a sustained, roaring ovation that echoed off the school walls. Students were on their feet, cheering, whistling, and crying. It was more than just applause. It was a powerful, unified expression of love and gratitude. Eleanor Vance, the teacher who had been dismissed as a relic, stood in the center of it all, not as a dinosaur facing extinction, but as a timeless hero receiving the ultimate tribute, the unwavering admiration of the lives she had forever changed. And as we watch her take in this beautiful moment, it's a good time to reflect on the teachers who made a difference in our own lives. Who was your Mrs. Vance? Let us know in the comments below what made them so special. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in the power of a great teacher, and subscribe for more stories that inspire. Because the lesson here is clear: technology and trends will always change, but the impact of a teacher who truly cares is a legacy that lasts forever.